So, the beginning of this reading, um, which is about halfway through Book 4 of Plato's Republic, um, they're looking for justice. They're looking for justice on the scale of the city, and they're hoping that if they can find it in the city, that they'll find out what justice is. And the assumption is that justice will be the same thing within an individual, which, of course, is a very questionable idea, but it's the one they go with. Um, so the city is, in its basic constitution, is complete. And this is Socrates speaking here. He says, and being perfect, the city is therefore wise and valiant and temperate and just. Wisdom, valor or courage, temperance or self-control, and justice. Those are four virtues, and they were certainly the central virtues of Greek society, of ancient Greek society. Wisdom, courage, moderation, or temperance, and justice. And the presumption is that the city, if it's actually well constructed, will reflect all four of these central, most important virtues: wisdom, courage, temperance, or moderation, and justice. I'll probably, it's a matter of translation. Valor is usually translated as courage, and temperance is sometimes translated as moderation, but more or less the same thing. So the idea is that they'll find all these four things in the city, and then perhaps be able to use that, what they find, as a means of finding it in the individual. And of course, they're looking for justice, but the idea is that Socrates has this idea that if they find the first three, wisdom, courage, moderation, or wisdom, valor, and temperance, then they'll just be able to find justice, because it'll be the one that's whatever's not there, whatever's left over, which is another kind of not such a great idea, but it's just really the framework in which Socrates is really expounding some ideas. So where is wisdom in the city? Well, if we go back to the structure of the city, they find wisdom in the gold class of rulers. That is, they are the ones who are wise. They're the ones who have knowledge. Where am I? Looking for valor or courage. It's not too hard to find. They find it in the brave soldiers, the auxiliaries. So the city, just as the city is wise by virtue of its wise rulers, it's courageous by virtue of its courageous auxiliaries or soldiers. And then things get interesting. That is, when things really start to get interesting, when they start looking for temperance or moderation. Right here, on page 4 of our excerpt, Socrates says, the virtue of temperance has more of the nature of harmony and symphony than the preceding. That is, what we'll see about the, looking for the virtue of temperance, which again is moderation, temperance, that it's a little more complicated. That is, before we found wisdom in one class. That is, the exemplification of wisdom in the city was this class of the gold guardian rulers. And the exemplification of courage or valor was this silver class of auxiliaries, or basically soldiers. But it's a little bit more complicated when it comes to finding the virtue of temperance, and as we'll see, also justice. That it doesn't consist in the city of being exemplified in a single class. As we'll see, it is the relation of classes. That is, that the city is temperate by virtue of a certain relation between the classes, and that'll be true of justice as well. And here is a key move. This is Socrates speaking. Temperance, I replied, is the ordering or controlling of certain pleasures and desires. This is curiously enough implied in the saying of a man being his own master, and other traces of the same notion may be found in language. This is a key move, and this is so characteristic of Plato's theory of human nature, this idea of ordering or controlling certain pleasures and desires. He goes on to say, and this is something, he says, there's something ridiculous in the expression master of himself, being a man being his own master, person being his or her own master or mistress. For the master is also the servant, and the servant the master. That is, can we be masters of ourselves? I mean, we're one person, right? So how can you be master of yourself? Well, as we see, the only way you can make sense, or that can be a sensible thing to say, to be master of yourself, is that, well, you're one person, but you're made up of different parts, and that's the key, right? And here it is. Socrates says, the meaning is, I believe, that in the human soul there is a better and also a worse principle. There's the key, right? And when the better has the worse under control, then a man is said to be master of himself. And this is a term of praise. But when, owing to evil education or association, the better principle, which is also the smaller, is overwhelmed by the greater mass of the worse, in this case, he is blamed and is called the slave of self and unprincipled. So this is heading towards a definition, remember, of temperance or moderation. So what would characterize the city in terms of temperance or moderation? Well, if in the human soul, if in the individual, temperance is when between these two better and worse principles, or we might even call them parts, when the better rules over the worse. And remember that Plato has said this concerns the ordering or controlling of certain pleasures and desires, then that means that the person is temperate or moderate. In the city, he says, and now, here, I said, this is on page 5. Yeah. And now I said, look at our newly created state, the city, and there you will find one of these two conditions realized. For the state, as you will acknowledge, may be justly called master of itself, if the words temperance and self-mastery truly express the rule of the better part over the worse. That is, the state, the city, is temperate or moderate because the better part, right, the gold rulers, the guardians, rule over the worst part, the bronze moneymakers. So if temperance in the self is when the better part rules over the worst part, temperance in the city is when the better rule over the worse, and the city is temperate because of this relation of ruling of the gold over the bronze. Gold, again, employing the silver, the auxiliaries, as an instrument for carrying out their orders. So that's why Socrates says here, then if there be any city which may be described as master of its own pleasures and desires, and master of itself, ours may claim such a designation. This is really key. This gets us pretty far in understanding Plato's idea. The question is, in the human self, what is it, this better part, and what is the worst part?